Would you ask Dr. Smith to come back in, please? Okay. All right, Dr. Smith?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Willett, when you're ready.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Smith, I'd like now to go back, please, to BRE 30418882, which we were looking at before, page 23, table 8, under the heading Render Systems. And you can see under that section of this table that there are 5 tests, and there are references there to phenolic insulation and polyurethane insulation at items 1 and 2, respectively, yes?
Yes.
Do you know what the name of the polyurethane insulation product was?
No.
Nor the manufacturer?
No.
Does the same apply to the phenolic insulation product and its manufacturer?
Yes, it does.
Looking further down the table under the heading Composite Panel Systems, there are references to polyisocyanurate cord panels and polyurethane cord panels at items 1 and 2. Do you know the name of the polyisocyanurate cord panel and manufacturer?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Do you know why only the core of these panels is described in this table?
What you mean as opposed to
As opposed to the other products?
Okay, so the fact it doesn't say steel faced.
Well, that's
yeah, okay.
that's actually right. That's the point. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Do you know why it doesn't say so in the data? Do you know why the PIR and PUR cord panels don't say that they had steel facings?
No, I don't. Although for those types of composite panel systems, it was probably taken as read that they were all steel faced.
Why would that be?
Because that's what they were that were available in the market, to my understanding, anyway.
Well, right. So you hadn't heard of aluminium foiled insulation?
Not in terms of composite panel systems that are used on, the outside of buildings.
I see. This is under the render systems as opposed to rain screen.
Under the composite panel systems. Sorry, I thought that's the section we were talking about.
Under that, yes, under that system, yes. So composite panel systems. Your experience was that the panels were always steel.
Yes.
I see. Now, neither of those panels achieved Class 0 in the testing, did they?
Which ones? The line 1 and 2?
The PIR and PUR cord panels under the composite.
I don't know.
If we stay with the test on page 23, you can see that both the test on the PIR cord composite panel and the PUR cord panel failed the full-scale test because of flame penetration. You can see that.
Yes, I can.
Yes, in the column. Did that concern you at the time?
Well, it was I don't know whether it would have concerned me particularly, other than it was additional data that we were collecting as part of this project.
Right.
To guide the development of BR 135. What
did those results tell you about the polyisocyanurate and the polyurethane cord products?
Well, it basically gives you the reason that they failed.
Did it surprise you, looking up the table at the rain screen system results, that none of the rain screen systems tested passed the full-scale test under what was then FAR Note 9?
That's evident from the results as presented.
It is?
Yes.
What I'm really seeking to understand is your reaction to it, if you had one. Were you surprised by that?
Not necessarily. I say, because this was all about setting pass and failure criteria for,
right.
For the large-scale test.
Indeed. But did you have a reaction? Did you have a thought about what that might mean, as opposed simply to seeing visually the word fail on the page?
Well, I mean, from BRE's perspective and my own perspective, I mean, we wouldn't then be looking to say, well, we can't fail everything, therefore we're going to change the criteria, if that's what you're suggesting.
Oh, no, not at all. I was actually really just seeing if you could tell me rather the opposite, whether you drew any conclusions about the fire safety of common products.
Probably not at this particular stage.
No. Oh, and is it the case that you yourself simply drew no conclusions of your own about the fire safety of common products?
Well, I mean, the data that's collected here is clearly showing sort of a range of performances, and it's also showing, you know, the sensitivity of systems to factors such as fire barriers as well. I mean, because none of these had fire barriers in them. So it's possible that if they were tested again with fire barriers in the relevant positions, then you may well have got, well, you would have got, presumably, an improved performance for some of the systems. But, you know, this was seen as a data gathering exercise to inform the development of, well, the test method and then the BR135 document and the classification criteria.
Let me ask you about fire barriers. We've touched on the fact that only 2 of the 14 systems tested included fire barriers. And we saw from the bid document that one of the stated objectives of this contract was to understand the contribution of any fire stopping present within cladding systems. You remember that? Yes?
Yes, in the initial proposal, yes.
Did it change?
It's possible that it changed during the discussions because obviously, as we also identified this morning, the scope of the systems tested was increased.
Did it increase so as to remove the understanding of contribution of fire stopping?
It probably evolved such that it was seen that those tested without fire barriers would give a worst case type performance, and it was probably, based on the discussions that would have been had at the time, decided that it would be more beneficial to test a broader range of systems rather than doing half the number of systems with and without fire barriers.
Oh, I see. Did you yourself ever investigate internally within the BRE why it was that, despite the fact that the bid document stated in terms that one of the objectives of the contract was to understand the contribution of any fire stopping present in the cladding system, in fact, only 2 of the 14 tests in the end had fire stopping or cavity barriers in them?
I don't recall at the time, but I mean, obviously, to deviate from the proposal would only be done with the agreement of the department. So it would have changed on the basis of discussion and direction from the department.
No, I understand that, but my question is, did you ever find out the reason for the
I
change?
don't recall.
No. Let's get back to the analysis report, please. At BRE 30418882, this is the 19th of September 2002 report submitted to Anthony Bird. Page 3, paragraph 7. At the bottom of the page, the full-scale test, it says, was the only method which satisfactorily assessed the system performance, including detailing such as fire barriers. Now, that's one of the conclusions of the BRE from this project, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you know how the full-scale test method satisfactorily assessed detailing such as fire barriers when only 2 of the full-scale tests actually contained any fire barriers?
Well, yes, as we discussed earlier, I mean, it's the only methodology that you can incorporate that detail into anyway. You cannot include fire barriers in any of the bench scale or intermediate scale tests.
That's true, but I don't think that quite grasps the essence of my question. My question is really about how the full-scale test method, on the basis that it did test the efficacy of particular fire barriers, did so when only 2 of the full-scale tests actually contained cavity barriers.
Well, obviously there was data there for those two scenarios with fire barriers in them.
I think Mr. Millett's
yeah.
point is that if you only do 2 tests with fire barriers, it's not a very large body of data
Yeah.
to determine whether the fire barriers really did much good.
Yes, I accept that point in relation to this test, but there was also all of the other work that had been done leading up to this
I mean,
large-scale test.
is the conclusion at 7 no more than, in fact, what you just told me, which is that it's a statement of fact that bench and intermediate scale tests cannot, by their nature, assess the performance of cavity barriers in a full system because they're not full-scale tests. Saying no more than that, I think.
That could very well be the case,
Right.
yes.
So they're not actually tests capable of assessing the performance of cavity barriers per se.
Well, of course they do as part of a system.
Well, that's the point.
Yes.
If they're going to, as part of
Yes.
a system, then don't you need rather more than just 2 out of 14 to be able to form a view?
Well, it depends what conclusions you're then going to draw, I guess, from that test. But if you want to have a generic solution, then you would need a lot more tests. But if you're talking about a specific type of fire barrier, and I think in this one they used an intumescent type metal grid that intumesces under the influence of heat. So the results for those tests would only be applicable to those particular fire barriers.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's really saying very much more than that.
Well, why not run each test in each series with and then without fire barriers in order to form a conclusion?
Well, yeah, in an ideal world, that's what we would like to do,
Well, why didn't you do it?
because you can only do what the budget will enable you to do. And, you know, you're constrained by a fixed allocation of money, and then it's a question of detailing the experimental programme within the boundaries that you have available to you financially. If we were to repeat all 14 tests with and without barriers, the project would have cost double the money. And at the time, the department wouldn't have had the budget, I'm guessing, to have done that, which is why the discussions took place with the project team and so on to vary the project and the scope of it and the scope of the materials, etc., during the course of the project.
Didn't approved document B at the time of this test require cavity barriers in the external wall?
Yes, it still does now, I believe.
Indeed. But at the time it did, and therefore why were you testing full-scale systems which, by the absence of cavity barriers, would not have complied?
Well, my view is that this was looking at basically the makeup of the external wall in a worst-case scenario. And given the information that we've already discussed as well, where, you know, some people were getting these details wrong or not including them, which is obviously a matter for enforcement, not a matter for the regulations as such, then it was looking at the worst case.
Well, weren't you interested in seeing how ACM of the polyethylene core panel performed where cavity barriers were present?
I don't recall what the discussions were around that at the time.
But no, but weren't you interested in knowing?
In an ideal world, you'd be interested in looking at lots of different variations, but, you know, that's sometimes just not feasible.
Does it come to this, that you had 14 tests, of which only 2 had cavity barriers, because you wanted to test a wide range of products, but in doing so, tested 12 out of 14 in full-scale tests that would never have complied with approved document B because of the absence of fire barriers?
Yes, but if you're setting then the criteria based on those tests, you've got an inbuilt margin of safety in the sense that a system that does comply and does have cavity barriers, you would expect to perform better.
But unless you've done a test, Dr. Smith.
But there is
You
a
don't
body
know
of
that.
evidence that led up to that.
you had no empirical evidence to form any conclusion that if you tested ACM with a PE core, it would perform better in a system with cavity barriers than without.
Not with that specific case, but there was generic, an emerging body of evidence from other systems tested that was indeed the case.
Now, I think you have told us, and you say so in your statement, paragraph 24 at page 8, I don't think we need to go back to it. We saw it, I think, last week, that there had been a clear recognition that it wasn't possible to rely on small-scale fire tests producing data on individual elements as a means to try to predict and control fire performance. That's in your statement. My question on the back of that is, did you consider at the time that the test programme as carried out, with only 2 of the 14 full systems containing cavity barriers, was capable of informing questions regarding the influence of cavity barriers?
Well, within the context that we've just discussed.
So yes,
Yeah.
I think is the answer to my
Yes.
question. And what questions about cavity barriers did this testing programme in the end inform? What did it answer? What did it tell you?
That basically by installing cavity barriers in a correct way, then they can improve the performance.
In 2 cases out of 14.
Yes.
Let's move on to some questions about intermediate and bench scale tests. Did you carry out or witness any of those tests?
Not to my recollection, no.
Let's look at this document, the analysis report, please, page 11, where we have the results under the heading Part BS 476, Part 6 and 7, and that's divided up into rain screen panels, render systems, and composite panels. If you look at the overall heading, it says this: the results from BS 476, Part 6 and 7 are presented in Table 2. The results from these tests were not as expected, with only 4 of the 11 products achieving Class 0. All the materials tested were believed to be Class 0 products when purchased for this project. Now, we've established, because you've told us, that it was the BRE who had purchased the products using, from the market, invoicing the department through AEAT afterwards, yes?
Yes,
Yes.
we used a third-party contractor to do that
Yes.
on our behalf. So BRE didn't go out and purchase the products because, there's a danger, if you like, in doing that because people think, well, why do BRE want some of our products?
It was done
it's
through
better for
AEAT as the middleman.
No, through another third-party contractor who you asked me who it was this morning and I couldn't remember. I didn't know. But that.
Right.
So it's a different contractor. It's a cladding type contractor who is familiar with designing cladding systems, etc. And that's not AEA technology.
Was that Fox Designs?
It might be. I can't be sure.
Right. What was the basis, just going back to the words on the page there, for BRE's belief that all of these products were Class 0?
It's something we would have asked them to go out and do, to buy.
Right. But it says were believed to be Class 0. Believed
Yes.
by the BRE?
Yes,
On the basis of what?
in the sense that the contractor would have sought and asked for Class O products and would have been told that they were Class O products.
Right. Do you know whether the contractor saw any independent verification or certification of the Class 0 status of those products?
I don't know.
Right. Do you know whether the belief was based simply on the say-so of the manufacturers or some sort of other objective data?
Yeah, I don't know. No.
Was your expectation, looking at that second sentence, that those products would achieve Class 0 when tested under BS 476 Part 6 and 7 by the BRE?
Yes.
If we look at Table 2 on page 12, the next page, please, we can see the data which reflects those results in the last column on the right, Class 0, and then
Yes.
there's a series of N's and Y's, no's and yeses. You see that?
Yes.
And Y is those which did achieve Class 0 by testing, an N for those which did not. Now, if you look at the aluminium sheet, item 3,
Yes.
you can see that it gets a Y. In other words, yes, Class 0.
Yes.
So that was one of those 4 panels that did achieve Class 0.
Yes.
Now, apart from being unexpected, what did those Class 0 test results tell you?
Well, that it appears that the market claims of some manufactured products were not as they ought to be.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to understand your thought processes when seeing this data. Did you think, as one obvious possibility, that 7 out of 11 companies were misrepresenting their product classifications?
Potentially, that was a possibility, yes.
Up to 7, not
Yes,
all of them. But
yes.
that did occur to you, did it?
Yes.
Really? And did it occur to you because you were cynical or sceptical about the familiarity of some of these manufacturers with the truth?
No, it was just the technical evidence as it was presented.
Well, the technical evidence as presented is that a Class 0 product, as told to your contractor, or perhaps as even certified by a certifying body, was not Class 0 when tested, even though it was presented as Class 0.
Yeah, I doubt any of these products would have been certificated or claimed to have been.
Right, all right. But and you said that one of the things that occurred to you was because because manufacturers might misstate the classification. Yes. What I'm interested in is why they would do that, to your knowledge.
Why they would?
Well, were you familiar, as an experience of your own at the time, that manufacturers would play fast and loose with the truth about whether or not their product?
No.
Right. But nonetheless, it was something that occurred to you, as you told us.
Yes, it was something that needed further consideration.
Another possibility, did this occur to you, that there were very serious reproducibility issues with testing to BS 476 Parts 6 and 7?
No, I don't believe that was a consideration.
You didn't?
No.
Well, if that's not the case, in other words, if you test a product to Class 0, it will always achieve Class 0, what other conclusion could you have drawn at the time, other than that these manufacturers were lying to your agent?
Well, that's what I said. It was something that needed further investigation or consideration, at least.
Yes. And were you struck by the fact that a majority of suppliers of allegedly Class 0 products for your testing had misrepresented the classification in that way?
Well, yes, in the sense that it was a surprise to us.
Did you think of taking that up with anybody in government? I know this is obviously in the report, but did you actually?
Yes, I mean, it was a matter that was in the report, and it was a matter that was raised. I mean, the kind of response to that was and has been for a long time, and has carried on in more recent times as well, that ultimately the claims that a manufacturer makes in the market are their responsibility. And, you know, they have to be able to justify those claims.
Did you think of raising this matter with trading standards?
No, we wouldn't have done that directly. I mean, it's very possible that the government department would have done that.
Right. Did you raise with Anthony Bird the possibility of his raising it with trading standards?
I'm sure there was some kind of discussion around that, because I think also at the same time the radar projects were going on around this sort of time as well, and I think there was also some results similar to this in the radar project that Warrington were undertaking.
Yeah, that was in fact in the May of 2000, but you're right about the results, and we'll come back to that in due course. Let's go to page 19 and look at that, please, under the heading Class 0. And it says, the results from BS 476 Part 6 and 7 tests were expected to confirm the Class 0 performance of the products used in this project. As the results show, all the materials achieved the required performance levels in the fire propagation test BS 476 Part 6, but a significant number did not achieve the required surface spread of flame classifications. There does not appear to be any one reason for this lack of performance. In other words, no one particular reason for the failures to satisfy BS 476 Part 7 had been identified. I think that's what it's telling us, yes?
Yes, correct.
What was on the list of reasons from which no one factor could be picked out as the cause? No.
No, I don't.
Do you know what possibilities had been thought through as to why it was that they routinely failed?
I mean, I guess people would have considered things such as the surface coatings, the colours of the coatings, thickness of coatings, and finishes.
Do you remember what your reaction to these results was when you first learnt of them?
Yes, surprise.
Right. Do you remember whether anybody else in the BRE was surprised?
Yeah, I would imagine the project team was surprised. It would have been them that would have brought it to my attention.
Do you remember what Anthony Bird's reaction within the department was, or anybody else in the department?
I don't recall, but I do know that there was an ongoing kind of discussion around this based on the earlier radar results as well.
Right. And was Brian Martin involved in those discussions about these surprising results?
I don't recall, but I would imagine he was, yes.
Do you remember sharing the idea or the notion with Brian Martin that some or all of these manufacturers had misrepresented the Class 0 status of these products?
I don't remember explicitly that.
Did you have any reason to consider that this situation where so many, as a high proportion, had failed Class 0 might be replicated across the market more generally?
Well, that's why it was necessary for it to be given further consideration.
Did you actually, to the best of your recollection, tell the department in terms that your suspicions, I think this is a fair way of encompassing what you've told us, were that manufacturers were routinely misstating the Class 0 status of products for which Class 0 had been claimed?
Probably in broad terms, yes. I mean, I wouldn't couch it in terms of manufacturers in general. I think you would have to caveat that with some manufacturers, because I'm sure equally there were manufacturers that, you know, were playing everything by the book, and their products and so on were properly supported by their performance.
But 7 out of 11 is a very substantial majority, isn't it?
Yeah, from the small sample that we looked at.
Indeed. But looking at the small sample of the data set, nonetheless, it was, I would suggest to you, I think, sufficient for you to be able to draw at least the provisional conclusion that the market, if not riddled with misrepresentations about Class 0, was sufficiently full of them to warrant serious concern.
There appeared to be something that needed further consideration, yes.
And that, so far as you can recall, was something warranting consideration that the government knew, is this right, had to be considered? Yes. Can I then ask you about the ACM test again? If we go back to page 11, just to link it up with Class 0, if we go back to page 11, you can see the second paragraph under heading rain screen panels, and it says there, the aluminium cladding panels achieved a Class 0 performance when tested to BS 476 Part 6 and 7. Both their performance in the fire propagation test and the surface spread of flame test showed they fully met the requirement of this classification. Now, given the test performance of the full system using ACM as the cladding panel, which others at BRE have told us was shocking, and you've seen the figures, did that result from the BS 476 test surprise you?
I don't recall, but no, I don't recall what I thought at the time in relation to that. I mean, obviously this is a factual run-through then, test type by test type, of the results that were achieved against those particular test methods.
But did it not strike you at the time that here you have a BS Fire Note 9, a BS 8414 test as it became, a Fire Note 9 full system test with ACM cladding with a polyethylene core that performs in the way it did, with flames reaching above the top of the rig before 6 minutes, on the one hand, and having to be terminated early, but on the other, those panels, when tested under BS 476 Part 6 and 7, passed with flying colours. Now, putting those two together, did that juxtaposition not surprise you?
Well, it probably did at the time, but I don't recall firsthand what I thought back then.
Or did it simply confirm your own historic negative views about the utility and the reliability of small-scale tests?
Yes, it would certainly have. That would have been one of the issues. Yes.
Right. Now let's go down to page 14 then, the same document, and to the final paragraph under the heading rain screen panels. There, you can see it on the screen, and there you have the results obtained from the single burning item tests summarised. Yes.
Yes.
You can see that in the final paragraph, because you have FIGRA and SMOGRA and THR results, and it says. The aluminium system generated high rates of fire growth and in both cases was extinguished early due to excessive temperatures and fire growth. This is reflected in the indicative classification of D, S2, D0.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And on page 19, if we just go to that, penultimate paragraph on the page, under rain screen, the penultimate paragraph there says, the aluminium sheeting system achieved the poorest classification in both tests, although it was the only system to achieve Class 0 in the British Standard tests. Now, there it is. There's the juxtaposition in clear terms.
Yes.
Did that result surprise you or concern you in any way?
Well, I think it was a clear indication of the sorts of performances or the performance that we were getting in relation to that test.
Do you remember whether any discussions with the department ensued as a result of that conclusion, particularly set in the context of the other parts of these conclusions I've been showing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what discussions took place with the project team, but it would have been, I'm sure, part of the discussion that then led to the drafting and was incorporated within the thinking around the criteria in BR 135.
In your own mind, were you clear, if not before this time, then certainly by this time as a result of these tests, that there ought to be very grave concerns about any regulatory system which continued to permit Class 0 external rain screen panels to be used as a standard for fire performance on high-rise buildings?
It was certainly pointing in that direction, yes.
Well, it was
Yes.
pointing in that direction. I think you'd arrived at the destination, hadn't you?
Okay.
Yes? Yes.
Yes.
And specifically, you knew that a panel might achieve Class 0, but also only achieve Class D when tested under the Euro norms.
Yes.
So you knew from this, is this right, that when a builder, or if a builder in the UK opted for a Class 0 rain screen panel, let's assume it had genuinely achieved Class 0, then that product might only achieve a Class D under the Euro norms?
Yes, I think that, you had, from the radar projects, it was very clear that because you're moving from sort of one methodology to a completely different methodology, you will get some materials, products that translate in terms of performance with the between the national and the European classes, but then you will get outliers as well. You will get some that will do better and some that will do worse. And this is clearly, an indication that moving across to the European system is, or was more beneficial in terms of the safety levels in the main.
Right.
than using the national classification systems.
If you say more beneficial in terms of safety levels, let me just explore the way you've just put it. Two questions. First, do you accept on this data that a PE called aluminium product would not have been deemed suitable for use on any building above 18 metres if evaluated only based on the Euroclass test and diagram 40?
Correct, yes.
But if evaluated based on the national classification system alone, class 0 in this case, the PE called aluminium product was considered suitable for use on buildings over 18 metres.
Yes.
Did you therefore have cause to consider at this point whether class 0 was an appropriate and safe metric for external surfaces of high-rise buildings, particularly in light of these test results?
Well, I don't recall exactly what the discussion would have been at that time. As I say, the main focus of this was around the development of the large-scale test method, and it was anticipated that that was going to be the way forward for buildings above 18 metres at this time.
Yes, and we'll come in due course to looking at radar and the transition period.
Yes.
But just focusing on class 0 for the moment, did you consider at this stage of the project, or indeed at any time afterwards, in light of these results, that the national reaction to fire classifications ought to be withdrawn from use in relation to the external wall of high-rise buildings?
I think it was generally understood that they would ultimately be removed. And I think the only thing that was up for debate is what was the point at which the national classes would be removed. And obviously that was a decision that was a government decision based on other factors.
Did you have a discussion at this time with Anthony Bird or anybody else in the department about removing class 0 in light of this test programme?
I don't recall. Certainly at this particular time, the European test standards were not embodied within the approved document anyway.
I think they've just come in fact.
Okay, so...
You may be right, but there's a 2002 amendment. Whether it was before or after September, I'm not sure I'm standing here able to tell you. But it certainly postdates the discussions about the radar report.
Yes, it was the radar reports that led to the incorporation of the European norms in the approved document.
Yes, and my question coming back to it is, in a sense, leaving aside the discussions of the radar report and the Harmonization project, which we're going to come to, were the results of this test not the clearest flag that even though class 0 might be withdrawn at some point, now was the time to do it?
That wasn't a decision for me to be taking. We were presenting the data and the results for others to discuss and take forward.
Did you expect government to act on it and accelerate the time at which class 0 was withdrawn based on these results?
I don't know in terms of accelerate. We understood that there was a commitment to do that. I'm not sure we understood exactly what the timeline for that was, so I wouldn't necessarily be looking in terms of accelerating that.
What was the commitment you've just described to remove class 0 that you understood at the time?
Under the Construction Products Directive, there was a requirement based upon member states of the European Union to adopt the European norms in preference to any national classifications. Any work on national classifications was halted at the point that the European tests were under development, so it wasn't possible to update the national standards from that point on. And the reason being that, they would then become redundant over the, when the new European norms were published, and they needed to then be, the national standards would have to be withdrawn.
Over what time frame? We'll come to see some documents
Yes,
on this
yes.
later, but at this time, just getting your evidence on this. September 2002, what was the commitment? What was the time horizon by which Class 0 would be scrapped?
Well, they weren't developed beyond, from about late 1990s.
No,
The
sorry.
national standards.
September 2002,
Yes.
if you'd asked Anthony Bird, when are we going to scrap Class 0, what would he have told you? As you saw it at the time.
Well, I think prior to the publication of the European supplement, everybody expected that to happen in 2002.
Right.
But that didn't happen in 2002, as I said earlier, for other reasons.
Now, I just want to ask you one or two questions about the IAG. Can we go to BRE 30s42045, please? And now this is I think we'll take this quickly. Looking at the front cover of this document, this is the generic data supporting the revision of BR 135, dated June 2002, which was prepared by the BRE for the Industry Advisory Group, yes?
Yes?
And also the joint working group of BSI technical committees, and you can see that. It's dated the 26th of June 2002, and therefore it's before the reports, the analysis report and the closing report of the 1924 testing programme, isn't it? Just in chronological terms.
Probably, yes.
Well, it
accept
is.
what you say, yes.
The dates are
Yes.
that. Just pausing there, did you put this document together? Do you know?
No, I wouldn't have done.
Do you know who did?
The project team would have done it, so I guess Sarah Colwell and Brian Martin predominantly.
Was it approved by the department before it was presented to the IAG?
Yes, it would have been.
Right, and who approved it on behalf of the department? Would that have been Anthony Bird?
Probably, yes.
And what was the role of the BSI committee and the IAG in this project?
Sorry, in the ODPM project, the research project.
Well, the revision of BR 135.
Right, so the IAG was there, I think, as we've already discussed, to provide input to the project, to act as a steering group, to provide their real-world knowledge, etc., and to guide the programme, and to provide feedback and comments in terms of their understanding and anything that wasn't clear, etc. And the joint working group, I guess this was presented to them to assist them in the development of the British standard development.
Was this document released more widely as part of the consultation on the revisions of BR 135?
I don't know.
Can we go to page 3, please? We can see there a list of the systems tested, ventilated cavity systems and render systems. Yes, and if we go to page 5, there's a table of generic test data for the ventilated cavity and render systems.
Mm-hmm.
You see that?
Yes.
And under that table, you can see the PE cord aluminium panels are at item 3. You see it says aluminium.
Yes.
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 And you've got the fail there. And at page 8, they're described as aluminium-based cladding panels.
Yes.
See that?
Yes.
Under system 3, aluminium-based cladding panels. Why were they described like that? Do you know?
No, I don't.
On one view, they're misleading. Well, that is a misleading description, isn't it? Because it doesn't identify the
Yes.
presence of a polyethylene core.
Yes, I don't know why they weren't defined as we saw earlier.
Right. Did it occur to you at the time that that description might lead a reader to conclude that the cladding described was pure aluminium, not a composite at all?
I don't recall. I mean, I think if I had have been looking at this, then it's something I might have raised. I don't recall.
Right. At any rate, do you know whether any members of the IAG, other than government, or the BSI Joint Committee, were actually told that the panels tested were ACM with a polyethylene core?
Well, typically in these types of projects, the IAG would have some physical meetings as well. And, it's usual that PowerPoint presentations and so on would be given, and there would be discussion around some of these things. So I would have thought they would have known.
But you don't know because you weren't there.
I don't know for sure. Of course I don't know.
Do you know whether anybody on the IAG or the BSI committee raised any concerns in respect of the performance of the aluminium-based cladding panels tested at full scale or intermediate or bench?
No, I don't.
You don't? Can we then move to the conclusions and recommendations in the analysis report of the 19th of September 2002? It's at BRE 30418882, page 24. Back to that document. And if you look at that, conclusions and recommendations, in fact, I think it's right that there are no actual recommendations in this section, are there? There are conclusions, but not recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, without reading them all in detail, but I'll take your analysis.
Yep.
Yeah.
But if we go back 3 days to 16th of September 2002, at the closing report at BRE 30418895, page 13, let's look at that. This is paragraph 5 at the foot of the screen. It says this: the aluminium sheet product satisfied Class 0 requirements, but in the full-scale, intermediate scale and single burning item test proved to be one of the worst performing products. As the current guidance in approved document B asks for Class 0 performance in diagram 40, these issues may require further consideration. Now, this goes over ground we've covered before, but the fact that the aluminium sheet, as the ACMPE, as is again described here, satisfied the requirements of the approved document, but nonetheless resulted in a catastrophic full-scale fire before 6 minutes, may require further consideration. That's all you put, all this document said.
Yes.
Did you intend, or did the BRE intend, that this result be an urgent red flag for immediate consideration and action, or simply a mild indication that the government might like to have a think about this in its own sweet time?
I don't recall at the time. I understand the way that you're interpreting that, but I mean the fact that it's there, we would expect that to act as the flag for the department to decide what they then wanted to do from there on in.
Is that right?
Yes.
So this oblique, rather loose recommendation, these issues may require further consideration. You thought that was enough to spell out to the government that the use of ACM panels over 18 metres presented an immediate and present risk to life, did you?
That they needed to consider the issues associated with all of this, yes.
You see, Dr. Smith, what you don't do in this report is to spell out in big letters to Anthony Bird that unless the government does something now about ACM panels over 18 metres, people will die. I mean, that's clear, isn't it?
Well, it's not put in those terms. I mean, you won't find, I don't think, any BRE report that ever speaks in those terms, because our role is one to present the technical evidence and the technical facts and the data, and then to signal what we think needs to be considered. And then it's up to the department with their statutory committees or whatever to decide what they consider and what they want to do going forwards.
Isn't there an intermediate step between the data and government policy? And that is to apply a human interpretation on the data, convert it into foreseeable human consequences, and then spell those out to the government so that government can enact proper policy, rather than leaving it to government to grub about in the data.
Well, I mean, all I can say is what I've already said. And I mean, you won't find, I don't think, in any BRE report, views expressed quite in the terms that you're expressing them now. It was always based on, you know, the technical, scientific evidence, and then issuing a flag as to the issues that they should be reflecting on. And also, I mean, this is the report that is in writing. There were meetings and discussions that would have been had as the project progressed around these factors as well. So, you know, none of this would come as a surprise to them when they first read this.
It might be suggested that what is missing, apart from what Mr. Millett suggested, is a clear assessment of the significance of the data. You give the government the data,
Yes.
you say, you think about this data, but you don't give them any assistance on assessing its significance. Do you think that was an omission?
And by that, do you mean in terms of the life safety, the significance in terms of?
I can understand why you may have not have thought it was a BRE's role to play up the human aspect, if you like, of this, because you're there to do a scientific job. But you might not be regarded as an impermissible step for the BRE to take, to say the data we've got on these panels indicates that they are highly combustible and liable to create significant fire. I'm not putting it
Yes.
very well, but you see what I mean? In other words,
Yes.
to spell out what the data are telling you, albeit in scientific terms.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, and perhaps that could have come through in the closing report. I mean, I think it's self-evident that those conclusions were drawn in the previous reports in terms of, you know, this hasn't performed well. It's performed badly in these contexts. So I think the information for me is all there, but maybe what this doesn't do is perhaps pull it all together in quite the way that you're suggesting.
You see, I asked the question because you told us this morning that the results of the test indicated to you that this material should never be allowed on a high-rise building.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I would have derived that assessment from what's written in paragraph 5. Do you think you would have done?
Well, I say that, and that was said in the context of the large-scale test method and the BR135 criteria that we were developing, that would, in our view, then slam the door shut on the use of these types of products on buildings over 18 metres.
All right.
Yeah, so it's,
Thank
you know, it was all part of that journey, really.
All right. Thank you very much.
It's right, I think, isn't it, that the reports and the data from this project have never, before this inquiry began, been released into the public domain?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I mean, obviously, you saw the document that was circulated to the SI and the IAG. I don't know if this was reduced, was any of this was presented for the 2006 revision of ADB as part of the consultation then.
The BRE never disseminated information, for example, about the testing carried out on an aluminium composite material.
Well, we
polyethylene.
wouldn't do that directly anyway. I mean, if it was part of the consultation package, that would be done by the department. They generally pull together a package of technical evidence for people to review to consider the proposed amendments.
I think it's right, though, isn't it, that the BRE didn't itself take it upon itself to disseminate the information in these reports?
No, I mean, BRE, as a general rule, is not permitted to do so without the full agreement of the department anyway, because we're bound by confidentiality in all of the frameworks and the contracts that we undertake for them. So we can only publish or disseminate anything if we're permitted to do so, since privatisation.
Do you know whether anybody in government made a positive decision that the reports and data from this work should not be disseminated outside government and the BRE?
I don't know.
Have you yourself ever considered whether these reports and data should be released into the public domain because of what they signify?
I don't recall at the time. I say I can't remember if they were released as part of the consultation package.
Do you recall at any time giving any consideration before the Grenfell Tower fire to revisiting this test data, or alternatively, at least to the need to warn industry and others about the potential dangers of using aluminium composite material with a polyethylene core above 18 metres?
No, I don't. I mean, as far as I think I was concerned, and potentially other colleagues in BRE, once the amendments to approved document B were made in the 2006 revision, it was considered that, as I said, that had closed the door on these types of products being used above 18 metres, and therefore, that job was completed.
Did you really think
for
that?
The time being?
Did you really think that? Because you know, of course, and we'll come to it in detail, no doubt, later on, but just picking up on that answer, and of course, the 2006 amendments continued to contain Class 0 in Diagram 40, didn't they, as the linear route to compliance for external walls?
For above 18 metres? Not, you couldn't just use Class 0 in isolation, no. Not my interpretation, anyway. Because there were restrictions placed on the insulation.
Right.
As well.
Okay, we'll come back to that in due course. But after the UAE fires in 2013 or the Dubai fires in 2014 or 15, did you think again about revisiting this test data?
Me personally, no, I did not. I can remember having some discussions with colleagues around the time of at least one or two of the Dubai fires, and just asking the question, now we are sure that this isn't happening in the UK and can't happen in the UK, aren't we? And, being satisfied that, yes, we weren't through our fire investigation project seeing similar sorts of materials on buildings, and B, that the BS 8414 system, including the BR 135 classification, was being utilised. And to that end, we'd never been either presented with, to my knowledge, prior to Grenfell, a BS 8414 test that involved a polyethylene cord ACM on a BS 8414 test.
So do we take it from that answer that your view was that it wasn't necessary to look at these test reports in the light of the UAE or Dubai fires, and it couldn't happen here simply because ACM with the polyethylene core was not used in the UK built environment? That's
correct.
Is that a fact?
That was my view.
Right.
It's not a fact.
It's not a fact,
as
no.
we know now. But at the time, that was my view.
Did you ever advise the government to release these results?
I don't know what the discussion was around that. No.
And we know that the BRE never, as it were, blew the whistle and put the results out themselves, or issue a public health warning to clients about the dangers of ACM panels. Just help me, why was that?
Because that wasn't seen as our role to do that. As I said earlier, we were bound by confidentiality. We couldn't just decide on our own that we were going to release results that others had paid for into the public domain.
Let's turn then to something we've been discussing before, the Radar 2 consultation on harmonization. And I'd like to go back in time a little bit, if I may, Dr. Smith, and look at the position at the beginning of 2001 and your own involvement in that project. First, I think it's right, isn't it, that RADAR stands for Research on Approved Document B and Revision, doesn't it?
I don't know.
Right.
I mean,
Right. Well, I'm not going to
Because
chastise
that was
you
a Warrington project, so
for the
it's...
acronym. Now, I'm summarising. Please tell me if this is right or wrong. As a result of the European Construction Products Directive, the Department had needed to consider amendments and updates to approved Document B in order to allow for the use of European fire test methods.
That's right, yes.
Right. And the radar research project was initiated, just help me, to assist the department to understand how the new European methods and classification system should be implemented into UK regulations and guidance.
That's my understanding, yes.
And to explore the impact of doing that, yes?
That's my understanding, yes.
And radar was research carried out by Warrington Fire, commissioned by the department.
Yes, that's correct, as I understand it.
Again, taking it shortly, do you agree that radar 1 was about fire resistance, radar 2 was about reaction to fire, and radar 3 was about roofs and roofing products?
That's my understanding, yes.
And the focus of the research was on, is this right, comparing the classifications achieved by various products when tested under the Euro class system as against the classifications achieved by the same products under the national class system, and seeing what happened.
That's my understanding,
Yeah.
yes.
Now, the product of the Warrington Fire's Radar 2 research on reaction to fire were 2 reports, I think, published in May 2000. And I'll just show them to you. Part 1 is CLG 50950. Let's just pop that up, please. CLG 50950. No, that's 590. I need 950, please. CLG 50950. And that was my fault. I'm sorry. That's the first page. If we go to page 2, you can see that this is, bears the title, Correlation of UK Reaction to Fire Classes for Building Products with Euro Classes and Guidance on Revision of Approved Document B. Part 1, UK and European Test Data and Comparisons between Classification Systems. And you can see at the bottom right-hand corner, it bears the date of the 23rd of May 2000. And if we go to CLG 50951, please, we can find Part 2. And that bears the date of the 26th of May 2000, as you can see from the bottom right-hand corner, and its title is Proposals for the European Supplement to Approved Document B. Now, I've shown you both of those just as their first pages, but were you familiar with these reports when they were published?
Yes, I would have been. I would have had a copy sent to me, I'm sure.
And the radar project was a PII, or Partners in Innovation project, wasn't it?
Yes, it says so there, yes.
Yes, and that meant, I think, that 50% of the funding for the project came from the department and 50% from industry.
Yes, usually, yes.
Yeah. Do you know which industry partners contributed to the funding for the Radar 2 project?
No, I don't.
You don't. Now, it's right also, I think, that Radar 2 was steered by an IAG, an industry advisory group, wasn't it?
I would imagine so, yes.
Right. And I think Warrington Fire was the lead partner.
Yes,
Yes.
It was Warrington project with the industry partners, yes.
Yes. And other members were representatives from within industry, so manufacturing of all kinds of construction.
I would
that?
think so, yes, and it was likely to be trade associations, I would imagine.
Now, if we go to the first of these reports, at CLG 50950, page 3, we can see that there's a table at the foot of the page under the heading Organisation of Project. And you can see that from the DETR, we've got A. Edwards, M. Payne, and D. Smith. And we can go over the page. There, you can see who the manufacturers and bodies are if you go over the page, and their various individuals. Going back to page 3, the D. Smith that I've just pointed out to you there, is that you?
Yes, it would have been.
Right.
I don't know why I was listed as DETR, because obviously I I never worked for DETR, so
Well, I was going to ask you that.
yeah.
But I mean, is it an indication of your closeness of working with the DETR, at least in respect of this project?
I don't know. No, I don't know why I was put down there
Right.
as DETR.
Your role, I think, was as a coordinator, because it says so. That you're in the coordinators column.
Right.
Is it right that among a number of other contracts, in 2001, the BRE and the department entered into a framework contract entitled European Harmonization of Fire Standards and Representation on BSI regarding smoke control?
Probably. I would have to see it to confirm
Well, I'll show
if
it
that
to you.
was the title and what the scope of it was.
Right. Well, that's
Because if on smoke control,
right. In 2001, I think you were also a member of BRAC, weren't you? Building
No.
Regulations Advisory Committee, Part B Working Party.
I was never a member of BRAC.
You were never a member of BRAC. Do you remember drafting or contributing to the drafting of the European Supplement to Approved Document B, which was considered by the Part B Working Party?
I probably did assist, yes, on that.
And who drafted it?
It would have been based on the outcome of the radar projects.
And who drafted it?
I don't recall.
Did you advise BRAC's Part B Working Party at meetings?
I would have presented,
Right.
potentially, and the way that would have worked is, you give a presentation as to potentially the outcomes from the radar project and the correlations that had been developed, and then it would be a question and answer session, and then the working party would agree or disagree, and documents would be progressed accordingly.
Can we go to CLG 401051? This is a report of a meeting of the Part B Working Party between BRAC and the Scots equivalent, BSAC, which was held on the 28th of February 2001, as you can see.
Yeah.
And under the background, you can see in the second sentence, it says the principal objective of the meeting was to consider the issues surrounding the harmonisation of fire tests across Europe and how the guidance in Approved Document B and the provisions of the Scottish Building Standards may need to be revised to reflect the proposed harmonised system. It was intended to bring together the salient issues for BRAC and BSAC as well as for the UK regulators preparing for harmonisation. See that?
Yes.
And then if you go to paragraph 2, under summary of proceeding salient issues, it says this: significant contributions to the meeting were made by Dr. Debbie Smith of BRE, FRS, and Dr. Paul Stollard of the Scottish Executive. What was your role there in making significant contributions?
Yeah, I don't recall firsthand, but looking at this, as I said prior to seeing this, I probably gave a PowerPoint presentation or the like based on the status at that point. I don't know if the radar project was finished or whether they were still ongoing, as to where they were at and what they were starting to show.
If we go to paragraph 5, same page, a little lower down, you need to scroll down to that, you can see that the report notes as follows: the comparative standard, and I think this is you and Dr. Stollard explaining, the comparative standard of EN tests against the current national standards was discussed in general, and it was agreed that the harmonised fire resistance tests were generally at least as good as the current tests. However, after discussing the Radar 2 project, such a conclusion was not reached with regard to the reaction to fire tests, as the test methods are significantly different. Dr. Smith advised that the proposed tests are more quantitative, as they rely on measuring heat release rather than measuring by eye. It was noted some products do better under this method, some do worse. Now, can we take it that what I've just shown you there from the note of this meeting is an accurate record of what you said?
In all probability, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have a reason to dispute it sitting there now,
No.
all these years later. If we go to paragraph 7, a little bit lower down, you say this: Dr. Smith gave a presentation on the draft European supplement to approved document B, which resulted in detailed discussion of a number of issues, both technical and procedural. There was general support of the document, although some points were identified as being in need of further clarification. Can you remember what the issues were that were discussed in detail as a result of your presentation?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Can you remember what the points were that were identified as being in need of clarification?
No, I don't know.
Do you remember whether any changes were made to the document as a result of the discussions that took place?
Well, invariably they would have been, because that's the whole point of these meetings. You know, you present something, you take feedback, and then the feedback has to be addressed accordingly. Or the guidance is given at the meeting that, you know, it needs to do this, or it needs to say that, or this needs to be clarified, and it's dealt with there and then at the meeting.
Right. Let's go to the Radar 2 report itself at CLG 50951, which is the Part 2 report. I showed you the front page, 26th of May 2000. And if we go in that document, please, to page 4, you can see there's a table, table 2, and that shows the transpositions of UK class 0 to Euro classes. And then there's a table 3, transpositions of UK class 1 to Euro classes, and then so on, classes 2 and 3 to Euro classes. And if we look at the bottom of table 2, can you see that you have 3 class 0 levels which transpose to C, D, and E. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the product identifications on the right-hand side, you can see that there are 4 products which, although they test to class 0 under the national classification, fall below B, and in the case of D, there are 2 products. You see that?
Yes, I can.
If you go to figure 1 on page 15, you can see a key, page 15. Here is figure 1, which is attached to the back of this report. And we can start with the key. And if the key could be blown up, please. It's at the bottom right of the screen. I just want to go through with you how this worked. You can see some 7 product types, yes?
Yes.
So wood has like a little roundel. Paints have a cross in a ring. Plastics, mineral wool, wall coverings, cellular plastics, which have a little box with a dot in it, and board and sheet. You see that?
Yes.
Who devised that set of categories? Do you know?
No. It would have been Warrington, I'm sure.
Right. Do you know into which category aluminium composite panels sat?
No, I don't.
Now, we know from elsewhere in this report that there were 64 products chosen and tested for the purposes of this exercise, weren't there?
Yeah, I don't know how
Oh, right.
it would work, but yes.
Take it.
Yes.
Do you know whether any ACM panels were selected?
No, I don't. Not without reviewing all of this.
And the same question, composite. Do you know whether any composite panels were selected?
No, I don't.
Do you remember whether anybody turned their minds to ACM or any other composite panel forming the rain screen product at the time of this exercise?
No, I don't.
Do you consider, or did you consider at the time perhaps, that the data in this table was representative of the range of products actually available on the market at this time?
I don't recall. I mean, my role in this was very much arm's length. Obviously, you know, Warrington were carrying out the research under contract to the department, so I would have just been the recipient, really, of information. I wouldn't have had a particular knowledge inside knowledge of what they were doing.
If we scroll back out, pan back out so that we can see how this table worked, I just want to see if I can follow it through with you. And we'll come back to it in due course. But does it work like this, that you take class naught at the bottom, on the bottom axis, and you trace it through on a product by product basis, and you see which Euro norm you meet?
Yes, that seems to be the case.
So, for example, and you can tell which products they are by reference to the key, yes?
Yes.
So, looking at class naught, you can find which class naught products are A1. There's one of them.
Yes.
Which is mineral wool.
Yes.
And that's the X. And then if you go up, there are, I think, 9, which are A2.
Yes.
And you can see there's a combination of mineral wool, paint, etc. You see
Yes.
that? And then
Yes, I do.
B is a larger range of products. And then above that, C, D, and E. And you can tell
Yes.
which products meet which.
Yes.
And just looking at that again, you can see the 4 products which meet C, D, and E,
Yes.
but which are also class naught,
Yes.
of which 2 are boxes with a dot, cellular plastics, yes?
Yes.
One is wood, which is E, and one which is a box with an X in it,
Yes.
which is a wall covering.
Yes.
Yes. So that's how it works. Good. Now, let's then... Well, perhaps we should break at this point. I'm going to go on into some detail here, but, Mr. Chairman, it's probably a good...
Is that a
point to break.
convenient moment?
I think so.
Right. I think we better have a break before we get too deeply enmeshed in all this. We'll stop now then. We'll resume, please, at 25 to 4.
Okay.
And same as before, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence when they're out of the room.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 25 to 4, please. Would you ask Dr. Smith to come back in, please? Yeah. All right, Dr. Smith.
Yes, thank you.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Smith, can we now please go to CLG 407308? And we'll come back, we'll flip, I think, back and forth from the radar report to this document. Now, this is a minute of a meeting of the Part B Working Party held on the 10th of May 2001, at which you were present.
Yes.
And you can see your name and Anthony Bird's name there as one of those present.
Yes.
And if you look down at paragraph 1.3, you can see that it says Dr. Debbie Smith from BRE/FRS is presently serving the Working Party and brings her expertise on fire testing and European harmonization to the group. Is that a fair description of your role in this meeting?
Yes, yes. So I wasn't a permanent member of the Working Party. I was just called in to provide input as needed.
And you had expertise on fire testing and European harmonization?
Yes.
Yes. Let's go to page 7, and you can see heading on that page, Radar 2, Reaction to Fire, and above it, below it, there is a paragraph 5.7. And starting with the second sentence in that paragraph, it says this: Dr. Smith explained that one problem was that there was an uneven distribution of products submitted for testing. Since PII is 50% industry-led, industry sent in the products that it wanted to send in. There is a natural reluctance by industry to put in poor-performing products. In simple terms, does that mean that the data set in Table 2 of the radar report, which we've just been looking at, is unrepresentative of the market or is skewed in some way?
Potentially, that's potentially what that's saying. I mean, obviously, my report back on this would have been based on the information that had been imparted by Warrington in their running of the project. So I can only, go by what this says, yes.
Yes. Did you factor in that potential for bias into your own work?
Well, insofar as we had a data set and whatever the data set was, I would have to go back and look to see where the concerns were around that being, the potential for that causing bias.
Well, did you factor that potential for bias into your own work and your own interpretation?
I'm sure there would have been some consideration of it and potentially some discussion of that with Warrington as to to understand the background to that.
But you didn't
it's difficult to recollect that now, yes.
Does it follow from your identification here of that potential for bias that although Table 2 records the majority of Class 0 products tested as having achieved Class B, in reality, there might be many products not submitted for testing, but nevertheless available on the market in the United Kingdom, perhaps in common use, that wouldn't or might not have been able to achieve a rating of Class B?
I think that's probably unlikely in actual fact, because I think a lot of the industry were surprised to some extent. They didn't have a huge amount of experience with the European norms at this particular time that the radar project was going on. So the extent to which they could have interfered, in effect, with the distribution of products they submitted was to some degree limited anyway. I mean, in the next paragraph, there's reference to the aluminium foil-faced insulations, and I think my recollection of that is that came as quite a surprise to that sector of the industry that they performed significantly worse in the EN test standards than they did in the BS.
You're making a criticism here, as I think it can be read. What would you have liked to have seen as a scientist which would have provided an even distribution of products? What other products would you have liked to see?
I can't answer that right now. I don't remember the details, if you like, of all of the 60 products that were tested. I mean, you'd need to go back and look at that. I'd have to try and refresh my memory somehow to remember all of this.
Can you go back, please, to the radar report? CLG 500951, page 4, table 2. And just look with me at the results. Sorry, just wait for it to come up. Yeah. Table 2, we looked at this before. You could see the class 0, but also C, D, and E results there for those
Yes.
4 products.
Yes.
And looking at those 4 products, can you tell us what work had been done to work out how commonly used the class 0 products at the bottom of this table, achieving those C, D, and E results, were in the UK?
I don't know.
Do you know whether any work had been done to work out how commonly used those products were?
No, I don't.
So for all you knew, product ref 1.03, which achieved an E, could have been a market leader above 18 metres.
I don't know.
No, but that's the point. I'm asking you why you don't know. My question is, did you ever ask yourself that question? I wonder how commonly used these 3 or 4 types of product, or 4 products, are in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recollect that. I say the project was very closely run by Warrington in conjunction and discussion with the industry and the trade associations that provided the materials, and I think there was probably a general expectation that the trade associations would do a certain amount of that normalisation to ensure that they had a representative selection of the products that they were representing. But yeah, I can't answer that. I can't remember the details of the discussions that took place around this that I was party to.
What were these products? Do you know?
No, I don't. Without, I sat here now, I couldn't help you with that.
Did you, in your work advising the Working Party, ever question the methodology of using this bell curve type of approach to transposition without knowing about frequency of use?
No, I don't think we did quite in the way that you're suggesting. I mean, the main goal of this was obviously the removal of barriers to trade. It was intended to, it wasn't intended. It was a legal requirement that any barriers to trade were removed and that the European classes were adopted. And, it wasn't... the same kind of treatment had to be applied across the data sets that were provided.
I think the answer to my question is no. You didn't question that methodology. Can I ask, can you tell us why that hadn't occurred to you?
I don't recall the discussions that we'd had around all of this at the time, but yes, it would have been, we would have discussed the best approach and how to best go about this.
Did anybody, to your knowledge, whether in May 2000 or May 2001, the radar reports and then this meeting, consider whether the data set used to transpose national classes to Euro classes was fairly representative of what was on the market in the United Kingdom at the time?
I'm sure there would have been discussion of that with Warrington and their project team.
Do you know what consideration was given to the possibility that this was an unrepresentative test by the IAG or the Working Party or by the department?
I don't know what discussions took place
Right.
Outside of that, of course.
Now, at the time that you and the Part B Working Party were considering the Radar 2 reports in May 2001, I think it's right, isn't it, that the guidance in approved document B contained only one suggested restriction for the use of cladding panels on the external face of buildings above 18 metres, and that was that such panels should meet the provisions of Diagram 40 and therefore National Class 0.
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah. And in 2001, as we've already seen, I think you were by now aware that the fire at Knowsley Heights in 1991 had spread up the entire external face of the building, despite the fact that the cladding panels used had achieved Class 0.
Yes.
And aware of Dr. Connolly's testing work in 1994 and his conclusions that Class 0 panels could permit extensive and potentially unlimited vertical external fire spread.
Yes.
And also, as we've covered, I think, repeatedly now, the fact that Class 0 as a measurement of reaction to fire couldn't, or at least couldn't alone, give an accurate indication of the true fire hazard of a cladding system.
Yes, that you needed the large-scale methodology, yes.
And also aware in 2001 of the Select Committee's recommendation that the Class 0 requirement in the approved documents in relation to external surfaces of high-rise buildings should be substituted and replaced by a full-scale test of external cladding systems in what became BSA 414.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And by now, I think you were aware, weren't you, that that recommendation had not been followed by government?
BS 8414 wasn't published until 2002,
That's correct.
so it wasn't available at this point.
But aware that the recommendation that test, Fire Note 9, which then became BS 8414, should be substituted in place of Class 0.
That was the recommendation from the Select Committee, yes.
Yes, and you knew by this time, May 2001, that recommendation had not been followed by the department.
Well, yes, insofar as
Yeah.
the approved document said what the approved document said.
Yeah, so that's the background, in essence, and you knew all those things. And in the light of that, then let's just move on through the document. Can we go to page 5 of the radar report? And that notes in the end of the first paragraph under 3, transposition options, the following. For other products, their position in the classification matrix is dependent upon a number of factors which may need to be examined on an individual product basis. These factors include, A, the fundamental difference in UK and EC testing systems, especially the use of overall flame spread for UK classification compared to the rate of heat release during the early stages of flame attack in the SBI test for Euro classification. Now, was that something is that recording something that you said at the meeting, do you think?
I don't know where that came from. No, I can't answer that.
And if we look at the last paragraph on the page, it says this in the second line, and it's a question. Is there any correlation between the I1 index in BS 476 Part 6 and FIGRA in the SBI test? Now, it's not clear whether that question is actually answered in this document. Do you know whether that question was ever answered in the course of this working party's work?
Yeah, I don't think there was a direct correlation between Part 6 and FIGRA.
If we go to Table 7 on page 7, just help me with this. Table 7 there is the heat release contributions of UK Class 1 products. And you can see in the column, you've got a UK Class 1 product, EC class, which has 4 Bs and then 5 Cs below the horizontal line. Then you've got BS 476 Part 6, I1 and I, those are the indices there, and then the FIGRA heat release rates, yes? It's right, isn't it, I think, that I1 and FIGRA are measuring different things.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And I1 is an average of 3 sub-indices measured as fire propagation, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And therefore, it's only part of one of the 2 tests for class 0, yes?
Yes.
Whereas FIGRA is a fire index growth rate measured in watts per second, isn't it?
Correct.
And again, that's only one element of the SBI test, which itself is only one element of the Euro classification, isn't it?
Correct.
So the fact that the correlation was not 100%, and in any event, was only one part of each of the tests, wasn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. So the degree of overlap is small. I don't want to use a word more extravagant than that, but it's pretty limited.
In terms of the correlation
Yes.
between the two?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would agree.
And I think you also agree that the test methods and setups were completely different as between these 2 tests.
Absolutely.
For example, do you agree with this, that 476 Part 6 was set up so that the core of a composite panel never sees the heat source?
Unless you burn through the outer layer, the
Yeah,
outer surface.
absolutely. So is this right? Do you accept any correlation made no allowance for the differences in size of sample, the position and direction of the heat or flame source, or the way in which the sample was held in place, or any detailing or returns?
Well, they were completely different.
Completely different.
The extent in the single burning item test, for example, you have to include joints and a representative fixing method, which it's not possible to do that in the Part 6 and the Part 7 tests. So, it's comparing an apple with an orange. They're both items of fruit, but they are different.
Yes, yes. Against that background, and indeed in the light of that analogy, did your analysis of the results in Table 2 of the Radar 2 report, which we've seen, with the Euro classes ranging between A1 and E, with class 0 remaining, cause you any concerns in relation to the class 0 classification as a measurement of fire reaction on the external surfaces of high-rise buildings?
So what we attempted to do was increase the performance requirement, if you like. So here, you'll see that the Class 1 products and some of the Class O products have achieved Euro Class C. We did not include Euro Class C in the same safety level provision, which was one of the proposals from the Radar 2 project.
Yes, and we'll I think come back to the Class C question in a moment. But were you not concerned by the complete difference between the 2 tests and the very small degree of overlap in correlation terms between them about the adequacy or safety of the transposition process?
Well, the transposition process was one that was required in law. It had to be done. There was no option because that had been signed up to by the various governments in terms of the European trade discussions around the Construction Products Directive. And what the UK set out to do was to do this in a responsible manner by testing a range of different products and, trying to do that, I say, as safely as possible by, ensuring that the level that the European equivalents were giving at least an equal or better reaction to fire performance or fire resistance performance, indeed. And I have to say, the UK went way beyond what any other European country did.
Well, maybe it did or maybe it didn't, but did you not think that given what you knew and given the limits of the data set, 64 products, that the transposition was likely to be something of a blunt instrument, given the complete differences between the 2 test regimes?
Well, I don't know how else this could have been done.
Well, let me suggest that the only way of achieving true and safe transposition, in other words, knowing whether a Class 0 product achieved Class B, was to subject every product to both tests.
But that's not a realistic proposition, I would suggest. I mean, it's not for me to say, but obviously to explore with the department. Somebody has to carry out that work and has to fund that work, and that's an enormous task.
Given that in an admittedly small data set, 2 out of the 7 Class 0 products did not achieve Class B, that's not a negligible number, is it?
Sorry, I'm not following your point.
Well,
now.
you have a small data set, 64 products tested,
yes.
and you've got 7 Class 0 products that don't achieve Class B. Sorry, 2 out of the 7 don't achieve Class B.
Right, so they achieved Class C, presumably.
Yeah. So, but that percentage was not negligible, was it? It was something like 28%. That's not a negligible proportion of mismatches.
And
Well, my point is this. My question is this. You knew that there was a real risk that a product could achieve Class 0, but not achieve Class B if tested.
there were some outliers, but there were a large group where they either achieved better performance or they did achieve Class B.
And how was the risk presented by those outliers assessed?
It was flagged. It was clear that there were outliers. It was reported in the radar results to the department.
Was any error factor built into the transposition process to cater for the 28% of outliers? You call them outliers, but I mean 2 out of 7.
Yeah, but I mean that they were when you look at the whole grouping for Class O. Insofar as, we couldn't alter the classification limits. There's no scope to vary those. You basically had to come up with some kind of correlation. And I sat here now, don't know how else you could have done that.
Did you ever... I'm so sorry.
Sorry, go on.
You hadn't finished.
Yeah, I was just going to say, given that the two regimes are completely different, you're never going to get 100% correlation. You're just not.
You're probably not the person to ask this question anyway, but there was presumably a transition period, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. I can't remember, it was probably about 2 years, something like that.
We could have decided at the beginning of the transition period just to adopt the European classification system and give industry 2 years to get their products tested.
Yes, I guess we could, but you'd have to check exactly what the transition period was.
Did that ever come up in discussions that you're aware of?
I think, yes, it did come up, and I think it was also complicated by the fact that each of the harmonised product standards had their own transition periods as well. So where you had, product families, they had to follow their own transition periods, which could be up to, I think, 36 months. So every product category was following a different timeline. Their start point was different.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I think it's an immensely complicated landscape, really, around all of that.
We're
Yes.
going to come to the transition periods shortly, I think. Can we go back to the Radar 2 report at CLG 500951, page 6, please, table 6. Top of the page, possible option for transposition of classes to reaction to fire performance. And you can see there's the basic table there with class 0 showing B or better, and there are 3 ticks, and there's some handwriting there. Do you know whose handwriting that is?
No, I don't.
It's not yours, is it?
No, it isn't.
So is it right that despite the data in Table 2 that we've seen, with the 4 products achieving Class 0 but only achieving Classes C, D and E, and in 2 cases D, the proposal here was to equate Class 0 with Euro Class B?
Yes, that appears to be the case.
And so how are you call them outliers, how are those 4 products treated? Were they ignored, or was an error factor built into the work in order to cater for their presence?
Well, it wasn't possible to build in an error factor because we couldn't alter the classification limits.
Right. So
You got the class that you got when you tested according to the ENs.
now, you've told us that, to your knowledge, there was no investigation of the frequency of use of those 4 products which had not achieved Class
I don't know.
B.
No,
Right.
I don't know because I don't know what they were. So there may have been with Warrington, but I don't recall that.
No. Do you know from your own knowledge how those 4 products were left? I mean, how would they be catered for in this harmonisation programme? Would they just be ignored?
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't know. If we go to page 8, please, in the top of the page, at little c, you see this. Under little c, it says, any reference to Class 0 being equivalent to Euro Class A2 would severely restrict the market choice in terms of materials for specifiers and clients. This applies to virtually all organic containing materials. In Germany and France, the authorities have a single classification, i.e. B1 or M1. Thus, Euro Class B could be a cross-border compromise, which is supported by the high product density obtained at the Class 0 to Euro Class B transposition point. Now, the high product density that's referred to there, is that a reference to the cluster of products that we saw in Figure 1 with the table?
I would imagine it is.
Right. Now, when it says here, any reference to Class 0 being equivalent to Euro Class A2 would severely restrict the market choice, was there a view that only very few products achieving Class 0 would be capable of achieving Euro Class A2?
I don't know exactly what the motivation for that comment was, but that is one possible reason for saying that, yes.
And causing a severe restriction of choice at the end of any period of coexistence of 2 classification methods, was that what was thought might happen if Class 0 was required to achieve Euro Class A2?
That's what that suggests.
With a
yes.
potential disruption of the market.
Yes.
Does this mean that any reference to Class 0 being equivalent to or required to be Class A2 would have been likely to have met with resistance from industry?
Yes, I believe that is what that would have done.
And if pushed through, caused loss to the UK construction industry?
Potentially, yes.
But would it also not mean that if Class 0 was made to be equivalent to Class A2, that would mean that at the end of any period of transition, buildings over 18 metres would be clad in materials that performed better in a fire?
Yes.
Quite apart from the potential disruption to industry, can you tell us what were the views of others, in particular the department, Anthony Bird in particular, about safety?
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask him.
Right. I mean, from your perspective, and doing the best you can to recall, was the balancing exercise being conducted by government, so far as you could see it being conducted, between, on the one hand, the need to avoid the risk of market distortion, and on the other, the need to ensure that fire safety standards were maintained?
I think that's fair. That there was a there was a compromise.
There was a compromise, and was that discussed during any of the meetings of this working party that you attended?
I don't recall.
And do you know how government went about achieving that compromise or balancing public safety as against industry choice?
No, I don't.
If we go back to the meeting note, please, of the 10th of May 2001 at CLG 407308. Let's go back to the first page and look at paragraph 1.3. We looked at this before, and you told us that you were the expert there on fire testing and European harmonisation. What at the time was your expertise in respect of European harmonisation?
So I think I had been at that point in attendance at some of the European discussions of the official laboratories group, as it was called, which was working in the years up to 2000 and around 2001 on the development of the single burning item test and the classification limits associated with those tests. And that was all directed by the European Standing Committee on Construction, who then had their own subgroup, which was the Fire Regulators Group. So they, in effect, controlled and directed the work of the Official Laboratories Group in developing the new... it was mainly the single burning item test, because the other, like reaction to fire tests, were already published as ISO standards. So they were picked up and adopted and then republished as European norms as well.
If we go to page 2 of this document, please, next, in paragraph 3.3, we can see that Anthony Bird outlined the main aim of the CPD, he says, which was to break down technical barriers to trade between member states of the EU. It is not the purpose of the directive to harmonise building regulations. And then he goes on to say in the fourth line there, what the CPD will do is to harmonise methods of fire testing, i.e. reaction to fire and fire resistance. The CPD will have a huge impact. It will affect how products are tested, labelled and moved around Europe, and manufacturers are beginning to realise this. Would you agree that the extent of the impact on manufacturers in practical terms would depend to a large extent on decisions made by the department, in particular about transposition and equivalence between the two systems?
Yes, and I mean, I think what he's referring to here is that by following the new testing regime, reaction to fire and fire resistance, those products that have been tested and classified according to the ENs would then be able to move freely throughout Europe. They would not then have to test in each country that they were sold into. So I think that's really what he's saying there in that last sentence.
Well, that's a positive thing, but was there also not a negative thing, that manufacturers are beginning to realise that their products needed to be tested under the, or at least tested as an equivalent under the CPD? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they couldn't move their products.
That's absolutely right, yes. Yeah, they would have to have the new European norms and the classification to benefit from that, yes.
And this would depend on decisions made by the department about transposition, equivalence, and the transition period, presumably.
Well, the department had to do it.
Did you advise on the transition period?
No, because that was all set out in the European legislation, as I understood it.
Let's scroll down in the minutes then to page 7 and look at paragraph 5.8. You're recorded there, page 7. Paragraph 5.8. You're recorded there as saying this. Debbie Smith went on to point out that a direct equivalence between UK classes and Euro classes was not possible. Problems arise as Radar 2 is based on a small data set, and certain products, such as aluminium foil-faced insulation products, are problematic. Mm-hmm. Concern was also expressed that in the Radar 2 proposal, the UK Class 2 had been equated with Euro Class C, together with UK Class 1, this could be seen as lowering standards. Dr. Smith reassured the members that in the draft European supplement they had not done this. UK Class 2 is equated more readily to Euro Class D. Members agreed that we must not be seen to be lowering standards. Do you remember what was the basis for your view that direct equivalence between the two systems of classification was not possible?
It was based on the fact that the test methodologies are completely different.
Yeah, as we've discussed.
Yes.
Yeah. And what was meant by direct equivalence? As opposed to what?
That they're not measuring the same properties.
What sort of equivalence would, in your view, at the time have been possible?
If you'd got two test methodologies that were both based on heat release rate, for example, then you might have been able to have demonstrated an equivalence, but they weren't.
And by whom was it agreed at the meeting, as is said, that we must not be seen to be lowering standards?
I don't recall.
Was any consideration actually given to whatever the importance of perception might have been, standards were actually being lowered by the method of transposition you were considering?
I don't know. I don't recall that.
Did
I
anybody?
mean, if anybody had objected, I think it would have been recorded, probably. So this suggests that nobody raised any concerns.
Now, do you remember that your own recommendation was that National Class 0 should be scrapped and replaced with Euro Class C? You remember that?
B, with Euroclass B.
Well, let's see how we go on this. Can we go to page 9, please, of this document and look at paragraph 6.8? At 6.8, it says, requirement B4, external fire spread, is to remain unchanged. Dr. Smith explained that the current diagram 40 in ADB 2000 on the restricted use of materials based on BS 476 Part 6 performance can no longer be used, and we must agree what to put in its place. Dr. Smith suggested replacing the performance requirement index I not more than 20 with Class C. On roofs, no guidance yet possible, etc. And then in the last line, therefore, for the time being, the current national test methods and classification systems are to prevail. Were you proposing that Class 0 be replaced by Class C in diagram 40?
I don't understand the context of this, reading this now. I don't know why it would be said it can no longer be used in 2000. I'm sorry, I don't recall the context of this. This doesn't make much sense reading this now.
Well, I was wondering whether you could help with it. Now let me ask you this. Was this possibly a reference to the part of the building in diagram 40 that dealt with the exterior below 18 metres?
I mean, it may have been, but as I say, I don't know why we would be talking about BS 476 can no longer be used.
I mean, it certainly looks from this that you were recommending that Class 0 be scrapped because Class 0 depends on passing Part 6 as well as Part 7.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't like to read too much into this because I say I can't understand the context of this as I read it now.
Let me see if I can help, because I don't want there to be confusion about this. I think you may need to see the then extant diagram 40. Now, this is, of course, May 2001. If we go, please, to CLG 15012, that's approved document B, 2000 edition. If we go to page 90, you can see that there is diagram 40, and that was, I'm going to assume, Dr. Smith, that this was diagram 40 under discussion in May 2001 at this meeting?
Yes, I guess it would have been, yes.
Yeah. Now we can see class 0 there for the dark shaded part of the building.
Yes.
But then we see under the lighter shaded, the medium shaded building in the box on the right-hand side, index I, not more than 20. And that relates to the part of the building under 18 metres, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Can you help us, therefore, going back to the minutes that we were looking at, what you were referring to?
No, I still don't understand why it's saying that that can't be used and we have to decide what we have to replace it with.
Right. Now, so you can't help?
No,
Was it your view that class 0 should be replaced, scrapped and replaced immediately, or at the end, at least, of a period of transition?
well, it's my understanding that that is indeed what would happen.
Right. And at the time of this meeting, it was envisaged, was it, that there would be a period of transition? Do you know whether it had been decided?
I don't know at that meeting, at the time of that meeting, whether it had been, but yes, that there would have been a transition period.
Right.
Yes.
Can you remember how long that transition period was to be at that time?
I don't remember exactly. I mean, I do recollect various time periods being spoken about, 2 years, but then, as I say, in the context of the harmonised standards, that then became 36 months. So, you know, things were quite complicated and often interfered with by decisions that were taken, you know, by the European Commission as well.
Now, going back to this question of replacement with Class C, it's right, I think, isn't it, that replacing Class 0 with A2 would have been the most restrictive and caused the most disruption to industry, but a replacement with Class C would have been significantly less restrictive and less burdensome to industry, wouldn't it?
What, instead of Class O, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you know whether there was a response to your suggestion as recorded here?
No, I don't.
Did people agree or disagree? Do you remember?
If it's not recorded in the minutes, I don't know. I don't have any detailed recollection.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
Can we then go back to the minute at page 11, paragraph 620? And it says there, on page 15, an amended diagram 40 needs to be produced, and Anthony Ferguson questioned the last line of the final paragraph, which states, index I not more than 20 should be replaced by Class C. Debbie Smith could not recall exactly where the figure came from and remarked that there was a general lack of data. As I say, that appears to be a discussion about the content of the draft European supplement to the approved document. Is that right?
Yes, it probably is, because it says on page 15.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know why that section needed to be amended to read Class C? Do you think your proposal has been accepted at this stage?
No, I don't know.
And you can't help about any of this?
No, I can't.
Did you undertake any investigations that you undertook to investigate, where it says action at BRE to investigate this information?
I'm sure we would have done at the time.
Do you know what those investigations involved or revealed?
No, I don't.
Now, going back to the idea of equivalence and your own view that a direct equivalence between the two systems was not possible, as we've seen and as you've confirmed today, if you look at paragraph 5.8, we go back to that, please, in this document, page 7, you can see that you say there, in the third and fourth lines, certain products, such as aluminium foil-faced insulation products, are problematic. Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, let's just focus on that. Let's look, please, back at the Radar 2 report, please, at CLG 50951, page 9. Paragraph 4.5. CLG 50951, page 9, paragraph 4.5, cellular plastics sector. And let's look together with me at A. In A, it says this, in the short report in part 1, Ref 3, which accompanied the presentation of the data on the comparisons between the Euroclass system and the UK fire assessment procedures, 2 conclusions were drawn concerning cellular plastics products. These were, 1, For the product group as a whole, no correlation was obtained between the Euro class system and the UK system. 2, for steel and plasterboard-faced products, there was a good correlation with the UK class 0 values corresponding to a Euro class B. I'm just focusing on the first paragraph of that, no correlation for the whole group. Were you surprised or concerned by that?
Well, I guess that's what gave rise to my comment that you've just shown in the notes, that,
Right.
that it was problematic.
Yes. And if we look at the second point, for steel and plasterboard faced products, it looks from the discussion below it that that wasn't limited to homogeneous products, but did include composite panels with a cellular plastic core. Yes?
Yes, that appears to be the case, yes.
But they could only achieve Class B because of the combustible component. I think that's right, isn't it?
Because of the surface.
Well, you say because of the surface. In fact, isn't it because of the combustible component?
I think we're probably talking at cross purposes. That they achieved Class 0 because of the steel face or the plasterboard face.
Indeed.
Yes.
But they could only achieve Class B because of the combustible component. They couldn't achieve A2 or A1.
Oh, correct, yes,
Yeah.
sorry, we're talking, yeah.
Yes.
Stammer.
But whether they achieve Class B or not wouldn't depend on the fire performance of the facing product, would it?
Well, obviously, the performance is dependent upon the whole product that's submitted to the test.
In the Euro tests?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you assume that all facing material would behave the same?
Did I assume?
Yeah.
No.
Because the reason I ask is that steel and plasterboard is not the same as aluminium, is it? Because
No.
aluminium might deform and fall off. Yes. If we look at B, products 4/05 and 412, which also give Class 0 on the UK system, give respectively Euro classes C and D in the European assessment. Both of these products have relatively thin aluminium foil-faced flexible foam laminates, respectively, based on polyisocyanurate and phenolic foam. With these products, it was observed that in the SBI test, the aluminium foil facing was penetrated such that the underlying foam was then available to contribute to the rate of heat release calculation, whereas in the UK BS 476 Part 6, the heat release found in that test was not sufficient to displace the classification away from the UK Class 0. Clearly, the introduction of a simple replacement of UK Class 0 by a Euro Class B requirement in any regulatory procedure would discriminate against products 405 and 412 against the practical experience of their acceptability in the UK market for Class 0 applications. Now, I just want to understand that, just simplifying it. Is this right? Warrington had concluded that some cellular plastic products, composite products, achieve Class 0, but not Class B. Is this right? Because the heat release rate satisfied Part 6, but didn't meet the FIGRA levels required in the SBI test to meet Class B, but only classes C or D.
In principle, yes, that's a reasonable summary.
But requiring those products now to meet Class B would effectively limit their market and discriminate them against them.
Yes, that's what that's saying.
Had you previously been aware that although several of the products which achieve Class 0 in the UK national classification system achieve Class B in the Euro system, foil-faced polyisocyanurate and phenolic foam insulation products got Class 0, but only D and C, respectively, in the Euro system?
Not prior to this.
Right. Were you surprised by that result?
Surprised? Well, it was a data point, so I don't think I was surprised or not surprised.
It was significant, though, wasn't it?
Yes, but I suppose in a way not surprising,
Right.
because the fire exposure in the single burning item test is is harsher in the sense that you have flames directly impinging upon the surface of the product that's being tested.
Not surprising to you, from what you could tell, did Anthony Bird understand that? Did government understand?
Yes, I believe so. I think Anthony was present in these discussions. Yeah.
Now, focusing on the final sentence that I've read out to you, I'll read it again. In fact, we want the last two sentences there, I think. And focusing on the penultimate sentence, not sufficient to displace the classification away from class naught. And then it goes on. Clearly, the introduction of a simple replacement of the UK class naught by Euro class B requirement in any regulatory procedure would discriminate against products 405 and 412 against the practical experience of their acceptability in the UK market for class naught applications. What did you understand the report to mean by the words discriminate against there?
It would mean that those products, if we went with the transposition of where the requirements are Class O, you require Euro Class B, it would mean that products that had previously been Class O and had been used in a range of applications could no longer be used.
Did you consider that it was important to avoid discriminating against foil-faced PIR and PF, phenolic foam, polymer foam insulation products, regardless of their comparatively poor reaction to fire performance when assessed under the Euroclass system?
No, and within the context of, the internal linings, etc., then say that the equivalence is Class O and Class B.
What was the problem with discriminating against products that, when tested under the Euroclass system, performed inadequately?
Sorry, could you please repeat that?
What was the problem with discriminating against products which, when tested under the Euroclass regime, performed inadequately?
From my perspective, there wasn't one.
No. Can you tell us about whether there was one from the government's perspective?
That is where, well, obviously they will need to speak for themselves, but yes, I mean the premise of the introduction of the Construction Products Directive and the framework that they set out and was required within Europe was to remove barriers of trade, not to necessarily remove products from the market.
From your knowledge, was the rationale in that last sentence there, namely the potential for discrimination against those two products, a factor in the continued retention of the national classes, and particular national class naught?
I don't know.
Was there any discussion about whether it might be beneficial to fire safety to restrict the use of those products on the basis that although they achieved Class naught, they didn't achieve Class B?
Not within that context, I don't believe, only insofar as there was a progression towards the adoption of the European classifications and, with the expectation that the national classes would disappear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, it's 4:30. We are deep into this topic, but
we're not going to finish it this
somewhere
evening.
about halfway across the pond on it. We're not going to finish it this evening.
Well, at the risk, the document's gone from the screen. Do you think we could have the document back up, please? At the risk of trespassing on your questioning for tomorrow, I wonder if you can help me with this. Do you see the sentence in subparagraph B, which has been underlined in manuscript?
Yes.
Which refers to the practical experience of their acceptability in the UK market for Class naught applications. Do you recall any discussion about what practical experience is being referred to?
No, I'm sorry, I don't. That may well have come... Oh, this is a Warrington report. No, it would have been based on Warrington's understanding and knowledge.
I asked the question because I'm a little uncertain what practical experience one would get unless there was a fire.
Yes, I I'm sorry, I don't know.
All right, thank you. Well, if you do have any further thoughts, you can follow it up tomorrow, Mr. Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, thank you. I think that's...
I think it's time we stop for the day, Dr. Smith, so we'll break there. We'll resume, please, at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And as I said before many times, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence
Thank you.
or anything relating to it over the break. All right?
Yes.
Thank you very much. See you
Thank
tomorrow
you.
morning.
Thank you.
And before we rise, can I just say thank you to our stand-in stenographer and document manager who performed in an exemplary manner today. Thank you both very much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Millett. Well,
Yes.
10 o'clock tomorrow then,
Thank
please.
you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.